How do you get leaders to think creatively?
We don't program time for many levels of leaders to be creative or innovative. They have so much operating responsibility. When are they going to be able to let their mind relax in a way that allows them to daydream and be creative with ideas?
Mm-hmm.
The best organizations create playful work environments where that might happen.
We are hardwired to play, and the play aspect of who we are gives us the need for spontaneity, gives us the need for delight, right?
Just the word.
Yeah.
Doesn't that do something to your brain?
For sure.
And it kind of like excites me. I like, okay, what's next? I'm Eugene Sepulveda. My definition of belonging is being able to show up as my authentic self. Know that people care about me and that I care about them.
Well, hello there, young man.
Hi, Raj. It's great to see you.
It's such an honor to have you, and I'm so excited to have a conversation because we have a lot of things to talk about. It's been an honor to support Culturati, to support you. You do so much. Capital Factory, now the CEO and founder of Culturati, the head of the Entrepreneurs Foundation. You're the co-chair for Obama's foundation in Texas Council. You drive, you cook food for people, you drive everywhere. You're just an amazing human.
As one of my friends once told me, when you don't have any children, you have a lot more time than the rest of the world.
Talk a little bit about your story and who you are, because I have been, after the first encounter, absolutely blown away by you and have fallen in love with you. I think you are someone who is very, very special to me and who I just hold a very, very tender spot in my heart for. Who are you, Eugene?
Well, Rajkumari, the feeling is mutual. I think I get overhyped, but who I am is, born a, lower middle class queer brown boy, and with all the psychosis that creates.
Yeah.
But instead of psychosis, I think it just created determination to have a voice, not only for myself but for others. And I think that determination of having a voice and making a difference, especially for others, has driven who I am. And I've worked hard to be able to speak for the queer community, for Hispanics, for the tech community when we were misunderstood, tech entrepreneurs when we were misunderstood in Austin, and to bring our voice to the table, whichever group that is.
Right.
And with an extraordinary amount of people behind me. It's not like I'm particularly brilliant, but I have really brilliant friends.
How did you find yourself caring about organizational health? Where did that start to really pull at heartstrings for you? Because what you do now with Culturati is phenomenal. I mean, what you have really put together in terms of this heart-centered experience is just mind-blowing. I remember going to Culturati in Austin and for the first time and thinking, this is the most amazing conference. This is done so differently than all the conferences that I've been to. How did you kind of find your way here?
Some people will say I'm spoiled, that I only want to be in certain environments. And I do only want to be in environments that are contributory, that are healthy, that welcome each person and their gifts and their idiosyncrasies. Don't we all have them?
Right.
I guess it was part of just adjusting the thermostat in any organization that I was part of. I wanted it to be welcoming and encouraging for everyone who was a part of it. Then I started realizing how important the leadership of organizations was, and the impact that they had on the temperature in those rooms, on the welcoming, and started looking at the science, what was behind this. And this was before, so I would say in 2012, I started studying the science of culture.
Mm.
And there wasn't very much being written back then.
I love that. Science of culture.
Today it's a ubiquitous concept. When I started talking to people about culture in 2012, I know some of my VC friends are like, oh my gosh, here comes Eugene with crystals. Now, and by 2015, they're asking, do you have a checklist for culture?
Yeah.
But in 2012, that wasn't a concept that was very highly valued.
Yeah.
And most of the research was proprietary. It was being done by McKinsey and Deloitte and Disney and others that sold it. So we just pulled together a group that started sharing our practices.
Where have organizations come from? Where are they now, and where do they need to be, in your opinion, and what you've seen and who you talk to every single day?
Well, I don't think there's any competent organization that doesn't think about its culture. Whether it addresses it adequately is a different question. And, in 2014 or 16, National Association of Corporate Directors issued a white paper saying that it is the responsibility of the board of companies to assess the culture and to hold management accountable to the culture. So I think we do a much better job at that. I think we're in an inflection point where that's just all shifted post-pandemic. So the science is being rewritten, be rediscovered in a hybrid workplace.
Yeah.
But I think most organizations address it. Whether they're doing that well or not is by organization.
Right, for sure. Talk a little bit about your partnership with McKinsey and how that's helped to, kind of bring forward some awareness or some insights across.
Well, my partner Josh, Josh Dilworth, who's co-founder with me, I guess by 2019, we decided it was time to take the research and data component of Culturati up. So we started looking for partners that would help us bring the type of data and research to the summit and to our community that we felt was necessary. And we went on a search and found that McKinsey and Microsoft were doing the best jobs at it.
Wow.
And so McKinsey's organizational development and change management groups came to mind. We found them, and it's been a great partnership since. Microsoft, which may be the best run company in America today, one of the best run companies in America today anyway, spends a lot of time developing the technology that I think will give us the tools to run effective cultures in a hybrid workplace. They're in development, but they are certainly leaders in among the thought leaders.
I would love to hear more about what effective culture is. What does that look like? Microsoft had their study that came out around meetings, back-to-back meetings, right? And not taking a break showed they ran some EEG scans on the brain. And what they showed was that, there's a massive deficiency that happens if you have back-to-back meetings without taking a 5-minute break even, right? But just had that 5-minute break in between 4 meetings, 4 30-minute meetings, makes a significant difference around engagement and stress levels.
I think, we're in an era where we're realizing leadership is paramount, but we don't only have leadership from CEOs.
Right.
We have leadership all through the organization,
of course,
in the team leaders and the supervisors, the managers. We've invested a lot in directors and vice presidents in the C-suite. I think the pandemic showed us the critical nature of the frontline worker and their supervisors. And I think the good organizations have pivoted and are investing a lot in those personnel. And when you had supervisors with more responsibility and expectations during the pandemic than ever before.
For sure.
And we had so underdeveloped
or
underfunded their training and development. And I think we're catching up. The better organizations that I know of are catching up on that today. And I think Stu's right. Not only is it, not only are teams the building blocks of organizations, we're, even invest in those individuals that constitute the teams. And I think we're finding technology that is helping supervisors, managers, directors, and on up to assess the success, the developmental needs, the kind of happiness and satisfaction and engagement of them on an ongoing basis.
Remind me the name of the fellow that spoke. He was a Navy SEAL.
Admiral Wyman Howard.
That's right. Give us some highlights of what he talked about, because I watched his interview, obsessively, actually.
Right.
I was in between meetings, and I was just so drawn into what he was talking about. Talk a little bit about what he shared in terms of how his way of engaging with his Navy SEAL team, the elements of that, and how that applies to where we are now with VUCA, right? He talked a lot about uncertainty. That was kind of his thing, and ambiguity. But, VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Connect the dots there for us. And what would you tell leaders, like, what is core right now that they need to be aware of?
It's interesting you should ask about Admiral Howard, because Tuesday night I was with Admiral McRaven, who was his boss's boss's boss.
Oh, wow.
But so Admiral Howard was head of operations for Navy SEALs. And we asked him to talk about leadership in uncertain times. And, what he talked about leadership in uncertain times is that you must have certainty in practices. So the repetitive practice, the clarity of ambitions, the lack of ambiguity of success and the path to get there. And as we're learning, one of the things we learned during the pandemic is the role in communications of the CEO is paramount.
For sure.
Everything.
Yeah.
And, many of the most successful CEOs during the pandemic kind of gave most of their job to lieutenants and spent most of their time communicating with all the stakeholders, investors, employees, suppliers, and customers. And that made a real difference. I've read many studies that showed that was a silver lining during the pandemic, was employees being able to communicate with the CEO more than they ever had before.
Oh, wow.
And having greater certainty and clarity of what they were to accomplish. Now, I think our expectations of accomplishment were dialed back a bit at the beginning of the pandemic. It was just keep rowing.
Yeah,
let's
exactly.
keep the boat on the path. But then the expectations raised, and most companies did pretty well during the pandemic for having completely remote workforces.
It's true. What's the learning of that now for companies? We saw that success. We saw some companies make quite a bit of profit. And now there's this, I don't know where, what's happening across the globe, but there's this push to go back to the office.
Yeah. And in Austin, the interim city manager just pronounced that everybody must come back to the workplace. And I read him, I said, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You have underpaid employees for the city in a market where we have so many vacancies, and you're going to make them come back. They're just going to come work for me. You get paid better. I think some lessons learned, I've long said that in our world, in the tech world, in the startup world, and I think it's the corporate world, clarity and conciseness equal IQ.
Yeah. Ooh.
And that's, the assessment of your IQ in the first 90 seconds. And I think what we're learning is that clarity and conciseness contribute to success in a big way.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that we've ever had to drill down to that level of clarity and conciseness as diligently as we had to during the pandemic.
Are you specifically speaking to communication style? when you're using
I'm
clarity?
saying any of us, CEOs today understand that they have to say the same thing over and over and over again for each of the stakeholders to understand it.
Absolutely.
And up and down the organization. I'm not sure we were always as deliberate about that. So that everyone up and down the organization knew where we were headed, how we were going to get there, and when we were going to get there. And I think we're doing better at that. In terms of the health of organizations, little politics on the side is, I think we've gotten greedy about profitability at the expense of workforce, but
for sure,
different topic.
This question just popped in my head, and I have no idea why I want to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway, which is, how do you get leaders to think creatively? And what I mean by that is sometimes leaders don't see options on the table. And in the moment that they don't see options, there's a panic, there's a stress factor, there's something that they're trying to execute on that is leaving them in this very kind of limited lens. How do we get leaders to think outside the box, to solve in different ways?
And when you're saying leaders, what do you mean by leaders?
Anybody
at any level of the organization?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think there's
the answer will differ, right, depending on where you are.
Well, I think we don't program time for many levels of leaders to be creative or innovative. They have so much operating responsibility that when are they going to have time for creativity? When are they going to be able to let their mind relax in a way that allows them to daydream and be creative with ideas? The best organizations take people off site, send them to retreats, create playful work environments where that might happen. But you think particularly frontline supervisors and managers don't usually have that luxury. I went to Hong Kong to meet Stephen for a weekend. He was working in China. I'm on Facebook, and I find out that 4 other friends of ours are there. And I just texted each of them and said, "Let's play."
You, Eugene.
We said, "Let's just go play." And that excited them. Although they were there for business reasons, for other things, they were so hooked by the idea of let's play.
Exactly.
And that's how we used to make friends on the playground.
For sure.
I think when we use that language, when we ask people to be playful, that engages a different part of our brain. And I think leaders who embed playfulness and invite playfulness are given permission to be creative, innovative,
right,
and certainly in a safe environment where you can fail.
Right. Well, I am going to interject myself here and talk about the neurochemistry of playfulness.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. We, according to Jaak Panksepp and his book Effective Neuroscience, we are hardwired to play, and the play aspect of who we are gives us the need for spontaneity, gives us the need for delight, right? And that playfulness. And when we engage in that spontaneity, when we engage in that delight, what we actually find ourselves experiencing is the secretion of serotonin, the secretion of endocannabinoids. We're actually hardwired for those different neurochemical experiences. I think, for me, bringing play into the workplace is, I think, going to become one of the top 3 experiences that we co-create as an organization as we move forward into the future, right? How do we bring the concept of community forward in organizations? How do we start to get the organizations to understand more fully than ever that when we create community, we secrete oxytocin? Paul Zak talks about in his article of neuroscience, the neuroscience of trust, when we have high trust teams, we're secreting oxytocin, right? How do we create this experience that teams don't feel alone? Well,
I want to go back to playfulness. I mean, just the word. Doesn't do something to your brain.
For sure.
And it kind of like excites me. I like, okay, what's next?
But do you think some people will get panicked around having to play? Like, how do you connect work and play together?
Well, the only people that'll be panicked are the people that need to play the most.
I definitely agree there.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it'll panic some old style folks that think that if they don't control every little thing, but if it gets away from them, they'll find greater creativity and innovation. You can talk about building community.
Yeah.
It's letting people establish what you're all about, belonging.
Yeah.
If I feel safe as my authentic self, and so much so that I can then care about other people and believe that they care about me.
Yeah.
I mean, communities just builds that way. So creating an inclusive environment where people belong, and where belonging is an active verb instead of just passive.
For sure.
I think necessarily builds community. Well, go further than that.
Please.
You have, shared vision, shared values, shared ambitions, create community as well.
We're right in the midst of Pride Month.
Right.
What do you tell someone who is, stepping into the CEO role, has been there, founder, whatever it is? Their company supports Pride Month, and yet they voted against marriage equality. And you're in Texas.
Yeah, I am in Texas. So some CEOs have been teaching me lately. And I, in Texas, we've been having a lot of bad legislation. So not this legislative session, which just ended, but 2 years ago, I was calling CEOs and saying, hey, you have to take a stand against this voter suppression legislation being proposed. And I'd already probably called them about 3 or 4 other bills that were at the legislature. And finally, a couple of my favorite CEOs are like, Eugene, I can't take a stand on that. And I was heartbroken because I know exactly where they personally stand.
Yeah.
But from a corporate perspective, what they told me is we're having to pick and choose our battles.
Yeah.
We have to, so that our voice still matters. And we're choosing to speak where we can make a difference. We're standing with our employees and with the ally groups unequivocally. But whether we're going to go down to the Capitol and make a public statement or sign a letter, we're choosing our battles so that we might make a difference for those issues on which we sign on. I want to take on in the instances that we're just talking about now. Let's talk about Target.
Yeah.
And, Target before, so what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, where they took a stand for the trans community. And I remember there was a boycott, which the right published as being successful. But I happened to be at a different conference with their CFO, who said when you look to store sales, they actually increased revenues as a result of taking a stand against discrimination.
Wow.
I was surprised that they recently backed off their Pride merchandising until I realized that they were doing it in part to protect their employees, that there are people coming in there so violent and so belligerent.
Right, exactly.
That it was threatening their employees. I'm not sure that I agree with how they decided to protect their employees.
Sure.
But I certainly agree with protecting the employees. And now I think the reason their stock has been in a free fall is really you believe that you're going to get more sales by listening to a small but loud group of bigots and offending loyal followers.
Yeah.
And so I think they made a bad calculation.
I love that you said that. And thank you for your vulnerability and your courage to actually say that out loud. How do you hold and welcome? Because part of what you talked about was belonging is about being welcoming. So I can welcome a human being, but they come with a set of beliefs.
Right.
And those beliefs are going to impact my culture in some capacity, regardless. And if their beliefs are in favor of violence, in favor of inferiority, in favor of command control, how do I work with that?
I'm not sure that's a fit. You know, I mean, part of...
But they're already at the company.
Well, but if they're not in sync with the values of the company, then they're not a fit.
So what do I do?
And I think we take corrective action.
Yeah.
You know, I think if someone doesn't believe that you and I should be in this company because of, you know, gender expression or sexual orientation, and feels a need to express that in the company, they're not a fit for our company. I don't know what company believes that people that would express the need for violence against other groups in America.
Oh boy, well, that's going to get into some spicy territory if we go down that road.
I don't know anyone who believes that inclusion means the acceptance of bad behavior, and I consider all of those bad behaviors. And those are behaviors that are not to be allowed in the workplace.
If you were to build a new organization today, I'm reading directly from the note card here, what would you do differently from 20 years ago? And I want to read this quote here because this is such an interesting quote. I don't even know what it means, so I'd love for you to enlighten me. Nowadays, I don't see anything as singular or two-dimensional. It's all multi-dimensional.
The complexity of the workforce that you would want to create. You know, we used to be able to do a one-dimensional matrix and say, oh, we need these skills and these levels of experience to hire and go hire. Well, now not only are we looking for skills and experience, we're looking at the demographics that create a diverse workforce, not for purposes of EEOC compliance, but because we want to reflect the perspectives of our current customers, future customers, our suppliers. Yeah. And that's much more difficult. So we're creating these three-dimensional matrices now of, what our workforce needs to look like instead of a, spreadsheet.
When bodies are mirrored in the world, their nervous systems move into a state of calm. When bodies are not mirrored in the world, their nervous systems move into panic. This is the science behind representation matters, which you've just kind of alluded to.
So when you say bodies are mirrored, what does that mean?
When I see myself in the world.
Okay.
So, for example, I don't see very many non-binary androgynous women walking around. And in fact, what has been very startling for me, because, the decades that I've been alive on this planet, is that when I do see androgynous women, I actually go into panic because that's my own internalized homophobia that comes forward. And it's not an experience I have very often. It's very, very, very rare. And so knowing the science, knowing, who I am as a human, I work with that in the moment.
Right.
And when we think about representation matters and we think about how essential and foundational it is in workplaces, why we have ERGs, right?
Right.
When you're talking to leadership, how do you present the importance of diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging? How do you present that to them?
As a competitive advantage, as how do you expect to appeal to markets that are not represented? I'll bring. Were you at Culturati when the keynotes were talking? The keynotes were talking about the showers in the hotel that we put them up at.
Yes, was that Airbnb?
That's Carolyn Wanga and Carolyn and another woman. These African American women that had great hairdos.
Yeah,
and we set them at a hotel that only had rain showers.
Correct.
And they said it's obvious that no Black person was on the design committee.
The design committee, yeah.
Because they realized that not Black people aren't always going to wash their hair every day.
Exactly.
And just simple things, and that was a funny, anecdotal
and poignant
example.
Yeah.
But, I think of a friend of mine, Jane Hickey, that will say it's obvious that no woman was ever involved in this decision because of the outcomes were only male-oriented. So, of course, we want people that represent the people that we want to reach. And as we've learned, particularly with board diversity, so diversity on board, what they're seeing is if you have, a board that's also inclusive of women, but they all went to the same prep schools and Ivy League schools, then you don't really get diversity.
Of course.
What you're looking for is diversity of experience and of problem solving.
Right.
So the good proxies for that are our gender and our race, but you got to have socioeconomic diversity.
And so many more things.
Right.
So many more things.
So, one of the discoveries we made in preparation for Culturati this year, and we surveyed for what our pillars were going to be, what we needed to talk about, what leaders wanted to talk about at Culturati Summit. And that was leadership reimagined.
I love
talent
that.
in a flexible world. And we changed intentionally from hybrid, and then the future of the workplace.
Yeah.
And so we had done that discovery between August and November of last year in preparation for our April summit. And then as a quick check, we went back and did some focus groups and some individual interviews of CEOs, I think 20 CEOs all around the country. And we discovered that we were in a new world, and we're in a world where there's really anxious investors and resistant employees.
Oh, wow.
And so CEOs and other executives were feeling an unprecedented pressure from both groups. Employees are resisting the call back to be full-time back in the office.
I know.
To spend 1 or 2 or 3 hours commuting.
For sure.
In addition to, 8, 9, 10 hours in the office.
Right.
Especially if there's not a payoff. I mean, we don't mind coming back to the office if there's a payoff for that. You talked a little bit about playfulness.
Yeah.
Encourage us to play. And what some of my best advisors are suggesting today is that we create the offices today are the old offsites, that they're designed for collaboration, creativity, and innovation for playfulness. And let us stay home to write our reports, to do our emails, to analyze reports. But that there's a payoff for coming to the office.
Yeah, I love that so much. Gosh, I want to ask you, a couple more questions. And I know that I honestly could just speak to you for hours and hours and hours. Do you know Barry Oshry's work?
I do not. I should.
Barry Oshry has a book called The Love Lab. He did this really interesting experiment, I think 20 years ago, where he brought in 9 CEOs.
Okay.
He made 3 CEOs. This was like an experiment, right? A little scenario thing. And I think it lasted 3 days. That three were the CEOs, 3 were middle management, and 3 reported to middle management.
So they were all CEOs, but he put them in different roles.
They had to.
Not happy CEOs.
The CEOs got luxury accommodations.
Yeah.
The managers got mid-level accommodations, and the direct reports got, not great accommodations. In day 3, I think he reversed it so that the direct reports got to be the CEOs, and then they switched that.
Right.
I don't remember exactly how he ran it. But what was so interesting was this concept of revenge that came forward. And I'm just so curious about what your thoughts would be around how do we start to bring about this awareness, being in someone's shoes, having the experience of what it takes to be in a role.
I'm embarrassed to admit that I was never fully aware of what it meant to be in a role in terms of how I needed to show up until I was in my mid-50s. I thought I needed to be authentic and true and share how my day was going instead of realizing as a leader, I needed to just pump optimism and encouragement and cheerful days around the office. Your story's also reminding me of, the study back about telling kids that blue eyes are good and brown eyes are bad.
Yeah, is it Jane Elliott? I think it's Jane Elliott, yes.
Well, and then this experiment that I did with Leadership Austin.
Oh my goodness.
At a luncheon one day, I put I created the haves and the have-nots. So we had 50 students. I was chairman of Leadership Austin.
Oh my gosh.
I put half of the people in a velveted robe, beautiful china, silver, wonderfully plated lunch, and the have-nots outside of the velvet rope with bread and water. And everyone knew it was a social experiment, but I made it a long social experiment. So it was this 2-hour lunch. And the animus that was created because of that turned out to not be a good exercise.
For sure.
Because we had some lingering animus.
Yeah.
So, the importance of this is, how much do we do that with the executive lounge and the executive parking spots?
Exactly.
And the privileges that even, what are the unintentional consequences? And there's reasons why.
That's such a good question.
The people that are coming in and out of the office because they're going to meetings might need to have a parking spot up front, or why, executives who are entertaining clients may need a particular dining room.
Yeah.
But do we communicate this?
Right.
And do we fall into the entitlement of privilege? And how do we explain it, or do we even bother to explain these different benefits?
I want to ask you one last question, which is, before we started recording, that you had so many godchildren.
Right.
And your face just lights up when you talk about your godchildren. They inevitably will grow up and become adults and find themselves in workplaces and organizations. What is your hope for them? What is your hope that they experience in their future when they get to an organization?
Well, I'll say we have 7 godchildren and 13 godchildren and 7 nieces and nephews.
Wow.
They range in age from 9 to 43. Most of them are in their 20s, 30s, and young 40s. My hope for them, one, is that they all become entrepreneurs, whether it's business entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, political entrepreneurs, or arts entrepreneurs, which simply means being creative and mustering scarcity as a component of creativity. So creating much from little and having to appreciate the value of that, then should Stephen and I, accidentally die at the same time, the provisions of our wills provide for fund lessons for them in philanthropy. So we've set it up so that a majority of our estate goes into these 2 philanthropic funds, and that all the nieces, nephews, and godchildren are facilitated in making decisions, philanthropic decisions, with those monies, so that they'll carry those values and those practices forward.
That's beautiful. Eugene, you came all the way from Texas to be here. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for your presence.
I'll always show up for you.
I just adore you.
Same here.
So much.
Feelings mutual. Thank you for having me.